Ernest, you are quite delightful, but your views are terribly unsound. I'm afraid that you have been listening to the conversation of someone older than yourself. That is always a dangerous thing to do, and if you allow it to degenerate into a habit, you will find it absolutely fatal to any intellectual development. As for modern journalism, it is not my business to defend it. It justifies its own existence by the great Darwinian principle of the survival of the fittest, the survival of the vulgarist. I have merely to do with literature. But what is the difference between literature and journalism? Oh, journalism is unreadable and literature is not read. That is all. But with regard to your statement that the Greeks had no art critics, I assure you that is quite absurd. It would be more just to say that the Greeks were a nation of art critics. Really? Yes, a nation of art critics. But I don't wish to destroy the delightfully unreal picture that you have drawn of the relation of the Hellenic artist to the intellectual spirit of his age. To give an accurate description of what has never occurred is not merely the proper occupation of the historian, but the inalienable privilege of any man of parts and culture. Still less do I desire to talk learnedly. Learned conversation is either the affectation of the ignorant or the profession of the mentally unemployed. And as far as for what is called improving conversation, that is merely the foolish method by which the still more foolish philanthropist feebly tries to disarm the just rancor of the criminal classes. No. Let me play to you some mad scarlet thing by Dvorak. The pallid figures on the tapestry are smiling at us, and the heavy eyelids of my bronze Narcissus are folded in sleep. Don't let us discuss anything solemnly. I am but too conscious of the fact that we were born in an age when only the dull are treated seriously, and I live in terror of not being misunderstood. Don't degrade me into the position of giving you useful information. Education is an admirable thing, but it is well to remember from time to time that nothing worth knowing can be taught. Through the parted curtains of the window, I see the moon like a clipped piece of silver. Like gilded bees, the stars cluster round her. The sky is a hard, hollow sapphire. Let us go out into the night. Thought is wonderful, but adventure is more wonderful still. Who knows but we may meet Prince Florizel of Bohemia, and hear the fair Cuban tell us that she is not what she seems? You are horribly wilful. I insist on your discussing this matter with me. You have said that the Greeks were a nation of art critics. What art criticism have they left us? My dear Ernest, even if not a single fragment of art criticism had come down to us from Hellenic or Hellenistic days, it would be none the less true that the Greeks were a nation of art critics, and that they invented the criticism of art just as they invented the criticism of everything else. For after all, what is our primary debt to the Greeks? Simply the critical spirit. And this spirit, which they exercised on questions of religion and science, of ethics and metaphysics, of politics and education, they exercised on questions of art also, and indeed, of the two supreme and highest arts, they seem to have left us the most flawless system of criticism that the world has ever seen. But what are the two supreme and highest arts? Life and literature. Life and the perfect expression of life. The principles of the former, as laid down by the Greeks, we may not realize is in an age so marred by false ideals as our own. The principles of the latter, as they lay them down, are, in many cases, so subtle that we can hardly understand them. Recognizing the most perfect art is that which most fully mirrors man in all his infinite variety. They elaborated the criticism of language. considered in the light of the mere material of that art, to a point to which we, with our accentual system of reasonable or emotional emphasis, can barely, if at all, attain. Studying, for instance, the metrical movements of prose as scientifically as a modern musician studies harmony and counterpoint, and I need hardly say, with much keener aesthetic instinct. In this they were right, as they were right in all things. Since the introduction of printing and the factual development of the habit of reading amongst the middle and lower classes of this country, there has been a tendency in literature to appeal more and more to the eye, and less to the ear, which is really the sense which, from the standpoint of pure art, it should seek to please, and by whose canons of pleasure it should abide always. Even the work of Mr. Pater, who is on the whole the most perfect master of English prose now creating amongst us, it is far more like a piece of mosaic than a passage in music, and seems here and there to lack the true rhythmical life of words, and the fine freedom and richness of effect that such rhythmical life produces. We, in fact, have made writing a definite mode of composition, and have treated it as a form of elaborate design. The Greeks, upon the other hand, regarded writing simply as a method of chronicling. Their test was always the spoken word in its musical and metric relations. The voice was the medium, and the ear the critic. I have sometimes thought that the story of Homer's blindness might really be an artistic myth, created in critical days and serving to remind us, not merely that the great poet is always a seer, seeing less with the eyes of the body than he does with the eyes of the soul, but he is a true singer also, building his song out of music, repeating each line over and over again to himself till he has caught the secret of its melody, chaunting in darkness the words that are winged with light. Certainly, whether this be so or not, it was to his blindness, as an occasion if not a cause, that England's great poet owed much of the majestic movement and sonorous splendor of his lighter verse. When Milton could no longer write, he began to sing. Who would match the measures of Comus with the measures of Samson Agnostices, or of Paradise Lost or Regained? When Milton became blind, he composed as everyone should compose, with the voice purely. And so the pipe or reed of earlier days became that mighty, many-stopped organ, whose rich, reverberant music has all the stateliness of Homeric verse, if it seeks not to have its swiftness, and is the one imperishable inheritance of English literature, sweeping through all the ages. Because above them and abiding with us ever, being immortal in its form. Yes, writing has done much harm to writers. We must return to the voice. That must be our test, and perhaps then we shall be able to appreciate some of the subtleties of Greek art criticism. As it is now, we cannot do so. Sometimes